This is Jerry Usher. Thank you for listening to the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The simple truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Higgins.
Great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we proclaim the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. It is Throwdown Thursday, where we focus on themes of spiritual warfare and the real challenges that are before us, all to better understand the battles that we are in, to actively, effectively engage in fighting the good fight, to participate with the grace of God that is being lavished upon us, and to share in the victory of Christ now and for all eternity. Our guest today is Dr. Ann Hendershott. She is a professor of sociology and the director of the Veritas Center at Franciscan University. She's also the author of The Politics of Envy, which is our topic today. It's a great follow-up from our conversation last week with Dr. Kevin Vost on the 7 deadly sins. Dr. Hendershott, thank you for being with us. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm great. Happy to be on the show. I'm grateful you invited me. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, it's a great blessing to have you with us. And I think it'd be good to start, begin with the nature of envy. So we know it is one of the 7 capital sins or deadly sins, deadly vices. And you write, quote, that most of us refuse to acknowledge our envy, even to ourselves, and that envy arises from and creates a form of blindness or lack of perspective. You also share an example that Dante expresses in his Purgatorio that demonstrates how he sees the nature of envy, the envious being punished by having to wear penitential gray cloaks, their eyes sewn shut with iron wire, because the truly envious are blind to the goodness, truth, and beauty around them. And this is a warning that the envious are blind to reason and love, spending their days tormented by resentment toward those that possess what they covet. Will you speak further to this aspect, to the nature of envy, that it causes us blindness, and we are often even blind to how it is afflicting us?
That's true. Yeah, and the idea of blindness is an important one because envy, a lot of people say, well, if you're blind, then you can't envy because you can't see what you're envying. Yes, but you... and that's why Dante has the penitents in Purgatory with their eyes sewn shut with wire. Imagine the pain of that and how the suffering that they go through. But there is a blindness, a form of blindness. And envy is the desire either for something that someone else has, or not even the desire to have what they have, but the idea that you don't want that person to have it, because you don't think they're deserving of it, or that you're more deserving of it. And so it bothers you so much that you want to remove what that person has, or the advantages of that person has, and you really want to destroy that person. And the idea of blindness is something that we used to teach our children about. I have a whole chapter about fairy tales and Shakespeare and literature that we used to teach to warn people about envy, like stories about Cinderella. Now, Cinderella is a story about the envy of the ugly stepsisters who see the goodness of Cinderella and the beauty of Cinderella and envy that, and they want to take it away from her. So they make her dress in ugly clothes, and they make her do all the work, and they don't let her go to the ball, but somehow she finds a good fairy godmother who gets her to the ball. And everybody knows that story, so I won't go into it. But the important thing is that when the prince finally finds Cinderella, even though the ugly stepsisters try to keep her hidden, and marries her, Cinderella is so good-hearted that she invites her sisters to the wedding. And in the Disney version, they go to the wedding and they're all dressed up and everybody's happy. But in the Brother Grimm's version, the original version, on their way to the church, birds come and they peck out the eyes of the ugly stepsisters. So the idea of blindness is woven through even fairy tales, which are certainly secular, but they're written as a moral sort of warning. The Brothers Grimm were very moral people, and they wanted to warn children. So lots of fairy tales to have the idea of blindness. Rapunzel, the prince who saves her, is blind until her tears of joy and love fall on him. Lots of fairy tales have the idea of blindness, because we are blind to the goodness of God and the goodness of love when we only see something that we covet. And that's why it's such a serious sin. I think envy is the most serious sin. And there are other saints who would say that too. St. Cyprian, St. Gregory saw envy as one of the worst, if not the worst. I mean, pride is often viewed as the sin of sins, but I see envy as woven with pride, because when we're prideful, we think we deserve what somebody else has. That should be ours, and we're kind of put out when it's not ours. And so we envy that person and we want to destroy that person. Right. So it's very different from jealousy. A lot of people confuse the two and they use them into jealousy isn't a horrible thing. I mean, we certainly don't want to encourage jealousy. But jealousy is understandable in that if we have someone we love, a spouse perhaps, or a boyfriend, we're jealous of other people who want to maybe flirt with that person or take that person. So jealousy can be benign, and it's usually wanting to hold on to something that is very dear to us. Envy is just looking at someone with such covetousness or such disdain and resentment that we want to destroy that person and destroy the happiness of that person.
Right. Yeah, it's awful.
So that's different.
Yeah, it's awful. So understanding it and thinking about that, being mindful of it, and actually thinking about examining one's conscience on those grounds is very, very important. This is not something we want in our lives. And I want to recommend to parents those Brother Grimm, the Brothers Grimm, their versions of those stories that they wrote that have been watered down through time now by Disney and everything else. Those are good moral tales. There is a vividness and a graphicness to them, but that captures the attention of the children quite well. You can find them all for free online, so something to think about. But yeah, I want to pick up on that theme that you talk about there, about in some ways that envy is the worst of the deadly sins, because it leads to so many others. You write about greed and rage coming from envy. The Catechism of the Catholic Church agrees with you here, saying this is what it writes under the Ten Commandments, where we find envy, which is under let's see, where is it? The 10th commandment is where we find it. And so it's talking here about what it is and how it leads to the others. It's paragraph 2534. It says this, that this 10th commandment forbids coveting the goods of another as the root of theft, robbery, and fraud, which is the 7th commandment, which the 7th commandment forbids that. So thou shalt not steal. It leads to that. Lust of the eyes leads to the violence and injustice forbidden by the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. And it says the 10th commandment concerns the intentions of the heart. It goes further, talking about this disorder of these covetous desires, mentioning that through the devil's envy, death entered the world, Wisdom 2:24. And then also, yes, talking about envy as a capital sin, and it's saying it refers to the sadness at the sight of another's goods. And it goes on to also quote St. Augustine. First it says, when it wishes grave harm to a neighbor, it is a mortal sin, stressing the seriousness of it there, but also saying St. Augustine saw envy as the diabolical sin. So there you go. I want to ask you this, that we want to be on the lookout for it in our own lives, certainly also in the lives of our family, if we're parents, or whatever our role in the family is, and then also in our community as well, specifically in the realms of church and state that have such an influence on society that we're in. Envy can explode in all of these areas, and I think that is what I appreciate so much about your book, The Politics of Envy, is that you're helping us to detect it in all of these areas, to be on the lookout for it, and then to see it, to notice it when we see it, and then to be able to not fall in to its deception, to its trap.
Right. And the thing with envy is it's always close to home. We tend not to envy people that are far from us, like movie stars and the president and things like that. We are not envious of them. It's an issue of propinquity. Aristotle warned about that. I mean, this goes way back, about the idea that envy hits close to home. You know, if our neighbor gets something that we don't have, we become very envious of it. Sibling rivalry can be deadly. I mean, look at the Bible. I'm so glad you brought up the Bible. Cain and Abel, the original murder was a murder of envy. Cain was very envious of Abel's ability to please God. And instead of getting a better sacrifice together, finding some animal to slaughter and that would be pleasing to God, Cain just wanted to eliminate his brother. So there would be no competition, perhaps. I don't know why he would think that would be pleasing to God. But that really was a crime of envy. And we see a lot of that in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very
Joseph
good.
And his brothers.
Yeah, very good. As we come up on the hard break, when we come back, we're going to dive into a lot that is related to this topic of envy. We're going to get into current events in state affairs and in government affairs and things that are going on in society. We're going to get into things within the church that are taking place, very much interconnected with things taking place in government and in politics as well. And let me leave you with this as we go into the break. This is from St. Gregory the Great. He says, "From envy are born hatred, detraction, calumny, which is a lying about others to hurt them, maliciously hurt them, a joy caused by the misfortune of a neighbor, displeasure caused by his prosperity." We don't want this. We'll be right back.
As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent from your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported. The Station of the Cross thanks our supporters who have enabled us to broadcast Catholic programs for more than 20 years. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel message and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments. Thank you for your continued support, and may God bless you and your family.
There's no better way to start your day than with spiritual formation from inspiring priests.
In regard to the spiritual life, one could put it this way: there is no resurrection without the cross. There is no Easter Sunday without a preceding Good Friday. There is no Mount Tabor without Mount Calvary. And there is no glorious transfiguration without a passion and a death.
That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
The Station of the Cross appreciates the generosity of our supporters. We are committed to keeping our donors' accounts up to date. If there have been changes made to your payment information, please call us so that we can update your account. 1-877-888-6279, extension 104. Or update your information online at thestationofthecross.com. Thank you for your generous support of Catholic Radio.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live.
We can no longer be children tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine and everyone who comes along with a quote-unquote nice message.
Tune in from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern for Mother Miriam Live on the Station of the Cross and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. You can also watch the video stream every day on Facebook or on YouTube.
Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Our guest today is Dr. Ann Hendershott. She is a professor of sociology and the director of the Veritas Center at Franciscan University, also the author of The Politics of Envy, which is our topic today. I do want to say one last thing about the nature of envy that we were talking about in the first segment. And I just want to echo the catechism once again here. 2540 says this: envy represents a form of sadness and therefore a refusal of charity, of love. The baptized person should struggle against it by exercising goodwill. Envy often comes from pride. The baptized person should train himself to live in humility. Then we get this great quote from St. John Chrysostom: would you like to see God glorified by you? Then rejoice in your brother's progress, and you will immediately give glory to God, because his servant could conquer envy by rejoicing in the merits of others. God will be praised. End of quote. Dr. Hendershott, anything more that you'd like to add for us in terms of sort of the remedy for envy in our lives before we delve into some of where it's popping up in society and culture around the world these days? What about the remedy, just to make sure that we understand up front that there is hope here, that we are not stuck in envy, and that we are able to overcome it?
Examination of conscience. Because I, as a young person, very young, I found myself being an envious person, and I was able to recognize it. Most people don't, but I had really good parents. I was a middle child, and I was very envious of children that had new things. When I was very little, as little as first grade, my mother told me I was just an obnoxious child. And I once told a little girl in first grade that her dress would look better on me. And my mother was appalled, and she told me that that's what envy is. And you would never, because it would have looked better on me. I'm embarrassed to even say this. But we need to tell our children when they're being envious. And I don't know if it had to do with being a middle child and wearing hand-me-down clothes. Oh, poor me. I've gotten over that. But I'm grateful to my mother because it stayed with me. She punished me because the little girl's mother told my mother, and that was a good thing. We should do things like that. And I should have been punished because it was obnoxious of me. But, other people are never aware of that. I mean, Gore Vidal, I mentioned him in the book. He once said, and he got, everybody thought it was hysterically funny. He said, when someone wins the National Book Prize, a little piece of me dies. Now, how obnoxious is that when a friend of his wins a big book prize and he doesn't, a little bit of him dies? That's envy. And somebody should say, you shouldn't be celebrated. That's not witty. That's not funny. That's not funny at all. And he would probably say, oh, I was just kidding, but it's not. Because I know a lot of people who I've worked with people who are so envious and similarly envious, and they're very unhappy when people get prizes or awards or promotions. And there's a lot of envy in academia, but recognizing it. So there is hope, but the first step is awareness. And this idea, Catholics have an advantage. And that before we go to receive communion, we do an examination of conscience. We go to confession. We are aware of what we were thinking that week and what we were doing and what we were saying. And our words can be hurtful, and they can hurt us. Envy hurts both the person being envied and the person envying. I mean, it didn't make me any happier to say that dress would look better on me. Certainly, I even remember, this was first grade. I mean, it's silly to say this, but envy is very much in my mind a lot because I think it's so dangerous.
Right. And then when you see it at scale, right, so not just in the life of an individual, which is horrible enough, but what about when that individual has influence over others? What if they have a great deal of influence over others, and you see it at scale? It becomes even more of a nightmare. I want to go through a few examples. One here is the example of one of the co-founders of the BLM movement, Patrisse Cullors. There's a great article, by the way, that just came out a couple days ago on the American Spectator. Paul Kengor wrote this article, BLM founder Patrisse Cullors, Marxist abolitionist, it's called. And he points to this video in there, and he says, everybody needs to see this video that she put out called What is Abolition? And I Am an Abolitionist. Well, we're just going to cut to the chase and play a clip from it, and you're going to hear real quick like what is really behind a lot of what BLM is as an organization, which is at the core of the BLM movement. Sometimes people want to try to separate the two, but we need to understand that there is a political push at the core of all of this with actual goals, and this is one of their goals. They're not talking about reform, they're talking about abolition. And what do they want to abolish? This is co-founder of BLM, Patrisse Cullors, in her own words recently. Here it is.
So everybody is probably asking about abolition and what it is. Many of you remember the defund movement last summer. Well, a lot of the defund movement was actually a call for abolition. And to really put it simply, abolition is the getting rid of police, prisons and jails, surveillance, and courts.
Okay, so they want to abolish all of that. Abolish the police, abolish prisons and jails, abolish the courts, all of this, right? And this is an aspect of envy. You just want to tear it all down, right? And so, I guess, what are your thoughts on this specifically related to envy? I also think of the Marxism angle here. I mean, she and the other leaders who have been part of BLM, they have called themselves trained Marxists. And I should mention even the demonic aspect of this, where they have also said that they openly practice a conjuring of spirits and have said that this demonic spirituality is at the center of BLM. So there's a lot interconnected there, but I think envy is certainly there. They just want to tear it all down. What are your thoughts as all of this has unfolded over the past, year or so, even longer with BLM?
When I see this BLM founder, she has stepped down since that, because she was exposed as someone who is so envious of everyone else that she has taken quite a bit of money for herself from the BLM movement and has bought herself some prime real estate in California on the water, $4 million worth of real estate. So Patrisse Cullors is doing very well for herself, but that's the way it is with the Marxist leaders. I write in my book about the Sandinistas, and Patrisse Cullors would, be like the Sandinistas in that when the Sandinistas overthrew the government in Nicaragua and they marched into Managua, the generals and the leaders of the revolution, Commander 2 in particular, because she was invited to speak at the University of San Diego when I was there, and that's another story, but they took all the nicest houses for themselves, these Marxist leaders who want to tear down things. They want to tear down things for us, but they want to make things better for them, for the leaders. And so they would say, well, they deserve these houses. Marxism is built on envy. You could not have a Marxist movement without the sin of envy. It's all about envy. And when you hear people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her aides, she has an aide by the name of Dan Riffle, who is probably one of the most envious people in Washington, D.C. right now. He grew up in a hardscrabble family, a single mother living in a trailer. You can tell he is very envious of those who didn't struggle. And he talks about his co-workers as leading cushy lives. And he said he came to Washington to burn it down. And he's very angry at the people he works with because they're happy with the way things are, and he's not. And his Twitter handle, this is AOC's aide, his Twitter handle is "Every Billionaire a Policy Failure," meaning he wants to take money from anybody who has money. And so I write a lot about Marxism because I see it as a movement built on envy. It wouldn't survive unless you could tap into people's envy. And that's what they do. That building of a guillotine in front of the Amazon.com CEO Jeff Bezos' house by a man named Chris Smalls, who was a former employee of Amazon, who's angry that he didn't make as much money as he thinks he should and thinks that Jeff Bezos shouldn't have that money. And so he built a guillotine and got great applause. People just thought that was wonderful. Isn't it great that they did this? And it was sort of like a traveling exhibit. He went to other people's houses. The guillotine is a scary symbol of the French Revolution. Off with their heads, the rich, although it trickled down, and it was the poor who ended up losing their heads too, and religious and nuns and priests, and everybody lost their head. But that's the way Marxism starts. It starts small and then it gets big. And then before you know it, there's millions that are killed, as in the Soviet Union. But it all starts with envy. It can't start without envy. They have more than you do. You deserve more. Let's get it. Let's burn it down. And you're seeing it in Portland. You're seeing it in Seattle. You're seeing it in Washington, D.C. It's all about envy. And that's how they encourage this.
Right, and some are more open about it than others in terms of those who have this Marxist ideology or some degree of it ingrained within them, because what we'll often find here is that they're not openly saying, they may say here or there some things that let you know that there's a Marxist ideology here. They may even say, hey, we're trained Marxists. Maybe they say that once in a while, and then somebody says, oh, don't say that. That doesn't sound very good. But what their main message is to people, like BLM, for example, is they'll try to find some sort of moral angle to which to hang everything on. No, what this really is about is we're standing up against the evil of racism. But that's not really what it's about at all. But that's what they try to use to deceive people, and they deceive many people to get into this political movement based on sort of this good end that they're putting out there. So we can stand against the evil of racism and also stand against BLM and stand against Marxism. Here's another example of someone who certainly has Marxist leanings. This is Democrat New York City Mayor de Blasio, who repeatedly declined to endorse capitalism in this interview. Just listen to this for yourself. 1 minute of de Blasio, and we'll get Dr. Ann Hendershott's response when we get back. Here it is.
Our national government, from Ronald Reagan to present, has continued to empower the 1% through the policies of federal government. Working people have created all that wealth in this country. They have not benefited. So I say there's plenty of money in this world, and there's plenty of money in this country, but it's in the wrong hands, and we have to have policies that give people a chance again by redistributing some of that money back to working people.
So do you consider yourself a capitalist?
I consider myself a social democrat.
So not a capitalist?
Look,
you don't believe in capitalism?
No, that's not what I'm saying, my friend.
Okay.
We are living in a capitalist society. But if you say, how do you philosophically identify yourself as a social democrat? I've said that's an identification for me. I'm a New Deal Democrat. I believe liberation theology has been a very important influence on my life. I think we look at this through the prism of what is fairness? What are we here to do in this world? We're not here to continually empower the 1%. We're not here to have government policies that make the rich richer while working people work harder than ever and get the less and less back.
And yet you
All right, there's a lot there. We're going to get to it and have Dr. Hendershott's response when we get back. We've got the music going for the hard break, but he mentioned several things there. One of the things that he mentioned was liberation theology. We're going to also go there when we get back and find out the influence of Marxism within the church. It is very much alive and well today. Liberation theology is a big part of the history of what's gone on over the past decades that you need to know about and how it's affecting the church and the world today. We'll be right back on The Simple Truth. Stay tuned.
Come to the St. Thomas More House of Prayer and discover the prayer that will change your life. The St. Thomas More House of Prayer is a Catholic retreat center dedicated to praying and promoting the Liturgy of the Hours, the prayer of the Church. The Liturgy of the Hours is prayed each day, starting with the Office of Readings at 5:30 a.m. and ending with night prayer at 8 o'clock p.m. So whether you're an individual or a group, schedule your visit today. Go to liturgyofthehours.org or call 814-676-1910. That's 814-676-1910. We would love to help you experience the Liturgy of the Hours and discover the prayer that will change your life.
We offer several ways to view our programming grid, including at our website, thestationofthecross.com, and on our iCatholic Radio app. Just click the menu icon in the top left portion of our app and select the link to our programming grid. That's at thestationofthecross.com and on our free iCatholic Radio app for Android and Apple mobile devices.
Hi, this is Joe McLean, host of the Catholic Drive Time Morning Show, joining you on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network each weekday morning at 7 a.m. We'll keep you informed and inspired with insightful guests and breaking news stories of the day. That's the Catholic Drive Time, weekday morning, 7 a.m. on the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio app. We'll see you then. Praise be to Jesus.
Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Our guest today, Dr. Ann Hendershott. She is a professor of sociology at Franciscan University, also the author of The Politics of Envy, our topic today. And we heard that clip of New York City Democrat Mayor de Blasio before the break. What jumped out to you, Dr. Hendershott, from that clip?
Well, first of all, the idea that he would get to decide who has too much money, that he wants to redistribute it. But more importantly is that he has been shaped by liberation theology. That disturbs me greatly. I have a whole chapter in my Politics of Envy on what I call unholy envy, and it's in our own church, the Catholic Church. Liberation theology, to me, is a very big problem. It was a very big problem to Pope St. John Paul. And it was also a problem for Pope Benedict. But it's not a problem. In fact, it's embraced by our current Pope. In fact, one of his first interviews when he became Pope, Pope Francis, told an interviewer in 2013, actually March 13th in 2013, that he felt that liberation theologians have a higher concept of humanity than the rest of us. So he privileges liberation theologians. He welcomed the founding father of liberation theology, the Peruvian priest Gustavo Gutierrez, to the Vatican as an honored guest. And Gutierrez had been absent from ecclesiastical circles under Pope John Paul II and under Pope Benedict, after making a Marxist appeal for effective participation of the church in the struggle for the poor. Now, we want to be down for the struggle for the poor. I'm not saying, I don't want to sound heartless, because I'm sounding heartless right now, I know. Everyone in the church needs to be sympathetic and helpful to the poor and do everything we can for the poor. But liberation theology is not the answer. But a few years later, Pope Francis elevated Leonardo Boff, the liberation theologian from Brazil, who had been not just spoken to, but severely disciplined by Cardinal Ratzinger when he was cardinal, by the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. But Pope Francis not only has rehabilitated Leonardo Boff, a Franciscan, but he invited him to help him write Laudato Si, his 2015 papal encyclical on climate change. So Boff is part of the climate change that the Catholic Church is now using. Pope Francis also reinstated the priestly faculties that had been removed from Miguel Descato Brockman, who had been suspended because of his participation in the Nicaraguan Marxist revolutionary government. He was a revolutionary and was defrocked or removed. His priestly faculties were suspended. I don't want to say defrocked. Descato now lobbies for Libya and remains a member of the Sandinista National Liberation Front. He continues to serve as an advisor to Daniel Ortega, the left-wing Nicaraguan guerrilla leader. And he's also a member of the Sandinista, the ones that I talked about marching into Managua and taking all the best houses. Pope Francis has embraced all of that. And I think that's a big problem, and nobody really wants to talk about it, and I get in trouble talking about it, so I have to be very careful. But Pope Francis has many times denounced capitalism, talked about the evils of capitalism, talks about trickle-down derogatory ways. His 2013 document, Evangelii Gaudium, in which he denounced capitalism as new tyranny, it's a problem. The Economist calls him the Peronist Pope. I don't know if that's true because I don't know enough about Peron, but they made a really good argument about that. The Jesuits have embraced him. In fact, Dean Detloff wrote an article in America magazine just a couple of years ago, maybe it was last year, embracing communism, saying that it needs to have another look, that we should consider it. I can't remember the name of the article. Rush Limbaugh, the late Rush Limbaugh, the late great, called Pope Francis Lenin's Pope. But I'm trying to find the name of Dean Detloff, a doctoral candidate in the Jesuit magazine, America, wrote an article with the title, "The Catholic Case for Communism." That's the name of it. I had forgotten. And the whole article is not just an apology for communism, but a case for communism, for embracing communism, and that Catholics can do nothing else but embrace communism, that capitalism is not a Catholic value.
Right. And there's a lot of Catholics in leadership in the Catholic Church that are corrupted in this way, that think this way, and that form others in this way. It is thick in the Jesuits, and they have numerous colleges, universities where they are putting this garbage forth and forming people in an upside down way with this stuff. We have to understand that this does not end well. This liberation theology, it's Marxism at the core. And when de Blasio talks about himself as, hold on, I'm just a social democrat, or a democratic socialist, whatever they want to use. The fact is that communism, socialism, Marxism, they all go together, and it is all part of this hope of this sort of like classless society, where in the end, this Marxist dream ends up with those who really pushed it. They're on the top with all the wealth. They're the kings that get to decide what they're going to do, right? And then at the same time, it never ends well. It's violent, and it always ends horribly. It seems like people don't know this history. Can you just share a little bit of the history? I think you do such a great job in the book educating people on just the history of this. This is not this utopia. This ends horribly wrong, and people are believing this and still pushing it, even when we have the evidence from history that this does not work.
No, socialism is a threat to me, and it's a threat. It should be a threat to everyone, because in order to make everyone equal, you need to take things away from those who have more to give it to those who have less. And we do that with our progressive tax code in this country. A lot of people say it's regressive, but it is a progressive tax code. The more you make, the more you have to pay in taxes. And most of us can live with that because we do want to help the poor. We also want to do it voluntarily when we give to the poor, when we give to Archbishop's Appeals, when we give to our church. We want to help the poor. But we don't want to confiscate wealth from people forcibly, because that usually requires force. In fact, it often requires the point of a gun, and that's what happens. People aren't going to just give up their house to let other people live in it, or their property, or their cars, or any of this. But AOC's aide, Dan Riffle, says that we need to go get their wealth through the stock market. And he's talking about ways that they're going to take people's companies. They're just going to take them. They are talking about that. And Pope Francis is on that bandwagon in some way, and I worry about that. When de Blasio talks about redistributing the wealth and being shaped by liberation theology, he's talking about confiscation of wealth. And then he's surprised when all these businesses and wealthy people are leaving New York City. He shouldn't be surprised at that. When you warn people, they take you seriously. And when you say that liberation theology is only on Jesuit campuses, you're actually wrong about that. I taught at the University of San Diego for 15 years. I loved it. I loved the students. I loved the climate. We had a beautiful Victorian house in downtown San Diego. I loved everything about it. Our son was an altar server from third grade through high school. But I gave up my tenure there. I left because I wanted to be at a school that was faithful to the real gospel, not one that was turning into a Marxist free-for-all. And that's what was happening. The University of San Diego invited one of the Nicaragua revolutionary leaders to be an honored guest, to be a speaker, to get an award. Her name was Commander 2 in the Nicaraguan rebellion, because San Diego the theology department had so embraced liberation theology that it was taught as our theology. It became a real problem for me, because then I was viewed as some kind of Phyllis Schlafly character, some capitalist, who doesn't understand the poor and doesn't care about the poor. And it became very uncomfortable for me. And so I gave up tenure, and so we sold our house. Our son had graduated from high school. He was our youngest son. And so I retired. And I was sad to leave, but I was tired of also fighting the battle of Marxism on my campus. But that's not the only campus, and it's not just Jesuits, because everybody wants to be like the Jesuits. If you have a Catholic school, not Franciscan and not Ave Maria, where I'm on the board of trustees, the faithful colleges don't want to be like the Jesuits. But a lot of them do. They want to be like Notre Dame or the Jesuits. I wrote a whole book about it called Status Envy. And it's about Catholic higher education trying to sell their souls to be like the big ones, the Georgetowns, the big Jesuit schools that have the high status. They're trying to be like them, but really selling their souls. So Marxism has infiltrated much of our church, and I don't think your listeners have any idea how bad it is.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I don't, if I did say it, I don't mean to say that it would be only Jesuit campuses, but they do have a unique intertwining, let's say, with liberation theology. The history that I was reading in your book about Jesuit priests being involved in these revolutions, taking up arms, and even becoming parts of the government themselves. It was quite alarming to realize that this is what has been going on. And then when you look at the background, well, okay, Pope Francis, Bergoglio is down. He comes from down in that area, right? And he is a Jesuit himself. So you start to say, okay, well, this is maybe some of where this influence comes from. Anything else to say, though, about the influence with the Jesuits and how that all played out?
At one time, we had a Pope John Paul II, who disciplined these priests, these Jesuit priests, for taking up arms. I mean, they are photographed with assault rifles as revolutionaries in this overthrow of the government in Nicaragua. And some of them, as you said, took leadership positions in the revolutionary government that was put into place. And Pope John Paul flew there, and on the tarmac, he was met by several of these Jesuits. And he pointed his finger at them. You can find the videos on YouTube. I include the links in my book. He points his finger and he said, "This cannot be allowed." Pope John Paul understood what happens with communism. He lived in Poland. He knew that the church was suppressed. He knows that communism is the death of the Catholic Church. At least nothing is the death. I mean, the gates of hell will not prevail. But it is the death of the church for the moment. It would be suppressed. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing the threats to our freedom, to our religious freedom. And if this goes any farther, I worry about our priests. Look what's happening in China with the priests and the patriotic church, and Pope Francis agreeing to that patriotic church, allowing them to pick the bishops. That's wrong. And somebody needs to say that. And I try to say that in a nice way in the book, but it's hard to say that in a nice way. So I have to be very careful, but I think we need to open our eyes. And I don't want to say that envy is the basis for all this, but whenever there's a move to Marxism, there's envy at the root of this. And Pope Francis and veer in that direction. He accepted a crucifix in the shape of a hammer and sickle from an artist, and he said, I understand what this means, and I agree with it. Mm-hmm. How else do you understand that? I worry about that, because nothing good will come of that. Nothing.
Right. We're going to talk about this further when we get back a little bit more on liberation theology. I want to make sure you understand what we're talking about here. If you're maybe confused by it in any way, we'll get into it a little bit further, and we'll hear from somebody who actually believes in this kind of a way, to hear it in an example of there are real people that think this way. All right. So if you've never met one, they're out there, and there's lots of them. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Prayer in time of affliction. Blessed, O Lord, be thy name forever. Who has permitted this affliction to come upon us? We cannot escape it, but must of necessity fly to thee to help us and turn it to our good. Lord, we are now in affliction. Our souls are ill at ease, for we are much troubled with this present suffering. Let it please thee, O Lord, to deliver us, for poor wretches that we are. What can we do without thee? Thy mighty hand can do all things. Give us patience, O Lord, and strength and peace. Help us, O God, and we will not fear, no matter how grievously we may be afflicted. O Lord, thy will be done. Welcome be the will of God. Sacred Heart of Jesus, we place our trust in thee. Amen.
Hello, this is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. All Scripture teaches the sacredness of human life. We do not have to look only at the specific passages that speak about the unborn child. Rather, the great biblical themes of the dominion of God over human life and the fact that we are our brother's keeper are present throughout the Bible. These are the themes that challenge us to be a culture of life. This is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life.
Do you love listening to the Station of the Cross on your car radio, but sometimes find yourself driving outside the listening area? Never miss another minute of your favorite show. Download the iCatholic Radio app so you can listen anywhere in the world 24 hours a day. The iCatholic Radio app is available for your phone in the Apple Store or for your Android phone in Google Play. Visit thestationofthecross.com for more information.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. Ann Hendershott, our guest today, a professor of sociology at Franciscan University, also the politics of envy, our topic today. And Ann, I want to ask you this about our bishops, in particular, those that we would call our good bishops, meaning those who seem to have goodwill and are striving for fidelity. It seems to me that they're not really understanding, I guess there's a lot of things that there seems to be a lot of confusion about, but in this regard, they're not understanding really the threat of liberation theology. They're not understanding the threat of Marxism in our time, and they're just kind of not really saying anything, just letting it go by, and hopefully things will work out okay. But I want to play an example. This is the late Cardinal George talking about liberation theology. It's a 1-minute clip, and just get your take on it. Does it sound like someone who really understands the danger here, and any advice you have to make sure that we understand it? Here it is, Cardinal George.
Is liberation theology good or bad? Liberation theology is very good in its intuitions. They've taken the gospel intuition that somehow the salvation of the world is bound up with the way we treat the poor. That's gospel. That's Jesus. And they push that, and they're right. The salvation of individuals in the world is bound up with how we treat the poor and the most vulnerable among us, including those not yet born. Sometimes the method of analyzing why are people poor used Marxist sociology, which depended too much on class warfare and seemed to indicate that there's no possibility of rich and poor coming together around Christ. Rather, the poor have to conquer the rich. And so it could be considered in its method encouraging violence. And that's why the Holy Father has said, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, don't take the method, but take the intuitions. And so it's both good and bad. And we should pay attention to the intuitions.
Okay, so does that sound to you, Dr. Hendershott, like a good understanding of the danger of this? To me, it sounds like, well, to say it's good and bad is actually underplaying the reality of this, which this is actually evil. This is not good. There could be good intentions involved, but this is often perhaps because too much dialogue with those who believe in this liberation theology. That's how they try to sell it, is to say, hey, this is a good thing. It's about the poor and all of that. But usually they're not going to mention the unborn like the cardinal did there. And if they do, it's more of a hat tip, and they're really pushing all their energies on this utopian classless society that will come about through politics, and that's what they're pushing, which allows them to look the other way or even advocate for pro-abortion politicians and to be hoping that the politicians will win who are pro-abortion because they're pushing more of this Marxist kind of ideology that they're more aligned with. It seems to me like Cardinal George and other bishops, they need to stand up more strongly than he did there. I haven't heard any bishops in our time speaking very strongly against liberation theology and helping us to understand what it is. What are your thoughts on this? Have you heard some things that perhaps I haven't heard from the bishops speaking out strongly on this?
I think the bishops are afraid because it sounds unfeeling of the poor and the plight of the poor. We do worry about the poor, and we have to take care of the poor. The poor will always be with us. We were told that in the gospel. And Colonel George, I loved him. I just did. But he's trying to be too kind here, and he ended up being totally confusing. It can't be good and bad. It can't be. The intuition, as he said, is good. So the intuition is, let's help the poor. But it doesn't help the poor by taking everything away from the rich, by bringing down the rich. It won't help the poor in that way.
Right.
And the idea of worried about politics, Pope Francis has insinuated himself into politics. And in fact, in October, I wrote an article for the American Spectator, and your listeners may want to look it up. It's called An October Surprise from Pope Francis. And in the article, I felt like Pope Francis tried to insinuate himself into the presidential election, by releasing his encyclical Fratelli Tutti and then talking about capitalism constantly. The encyclical, in section 103 in the encyclical, the heading of the encyclical says, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, which is the motto of the French Revolution. So, I mean, that's a strong message against the rich. The French Revolution was all about kill the rich off with their heads. And for him to channel Robespierre in this way, I thought was really a problem. I found that motto pretty chilling when I read that. And it was pretty shocking. But it shouldn't be shocking because the content was the same as Pope Francis has been doing since he became Pope, denigrating capitalism from the earliest days of his papacy, envisioning a world without borders. Now, Fratelli Tutti admonishes us that in order to enjoy fraternity, we have to welcome everyone, and that whole idea of welcoming the stranger. And that's a noble cause. We need to welcome the stranger. And I agree with that. But we can't give everything away without hurting our own country.
Right. We have to talk about what does that reasonably mean. We can't just throw out a phrase, a label, and just say like that is anything I want it to be now, whatever policy I want to put into place, that's welcoming the stranger. No, we have to reasonably speak about these things. Let me just echo real quick what the Catechism says on this about capitalism, about communism and socialism. Catechism is clear. Church teaching is clear. This is 2425 on the social doctrine of the church. It says the church has rejected the totalitarian and atheistic ideologies associated in modern times with communism or socialism. And it says also here, she has likewise refused to accept in the practice of capitalism individualism and the absolute primacy of the law of the marketplace over human labor, meaning to say you can do anything you want as long as it's in a free market. No, the church is rejecting that aspect of an unfettered capitalism. It says here, reasonable regulation of the marketplace and economic initiatives in keeping with a just hierarchy of values and a view to the common good is to be commended. So it's saying, look, capitalism is not inherently evil. It is good. Can there be evil things that creep in? There has to be some good regulation, of course. But it is saying communism, socialism, totalitarianism, atheistic ideologies, these are inherently evil. The church is being clear in this way, and I think we need to be clear in this way. We're not going to get to our final clip, but I do want to just ask you to comment on it, Dr. Hendershott. This is a fellow by the name of Jim Wallace. He calls himself a progressive evangelical Christian. He's really a Marxist, socialist, communist sympathizer, and those are the views that he really holds when you listen to him talk. And he says his conversion came about from Matthew 25, and he interprets it as that Jesus is more radical than communism and socialism. He is a communist. He's before all that, and Pope Francis is the same way. So people think this way. He doesn't mention anything, by the way, about abortion, about the preborn, doesn't even think about that, but he is talking about Marxism and all of this. There are real people out there, and many of them are leaders in the church who think this way and are forming people in this way, and they try to hide it. There's very few that are totally honest about it, that believe this stuff, or maybe even understand deeply what they're believing and what they're handing on themselves. But what is your, final thought to us about the fact that this is real? Real people think this. They even think that the Catholic faith or the Christian faith is consistent with communism, that Jesus somehow was a communist or even more radical than that.
No, that's why we have to be so careful about where you send your children to school, what you're reading, what you're talking about, the programs you watch. Catholic higher education has been very much infiltrated by this Marxist ideology, but not the faithful schools. The faithful schools like Franciscan University, Ave Maria, Christendom, they have held the line. And so I can't imagine sending a child to a school where they would be exposed to these deviant ideas of socialism and communism and not having them be shaped by it. You just wouldn't want to do that. And no child should have to battle every day of his college education. So the idea is send them to a faithful college. And there are quite a few in the Cardinal Newman Society Guide.
Yes.
There's about 20 of them.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Hendershott. Again, get the book, The Politics of Envy. It is terrific. God bless you.